Welcome, it's California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance, and we are joined by Coby King. He is the chairman of the Valley Industry and Commerce Association, VICA. And I want to speak with you about transportation. As someone who grew up in the Valley, I know that transportation in the Valley can be very difficult.
It can be. It can be. Thanks for having me today.
Of course. Let's talk about what we know as the Orange Line. I remember that opened with great fanfare maybe 20 years ago or so?
Not quite, 10 years ago.
Okay.
But a very successful 10 years, actually. When the Orange Line opened up 10 years ago, people were unsure whether or not people would ride a BRT, Bus Rapid Transit, but it has been hugely successful. Metro had originally estimated that maybe 5,000 people a day would ride it. It is at full capacity, carrying 30,000 people a day.
Too successful in some ways.
Absolutely. What has happened, it is a victim of its own success. And because a couple of things have happened. One, because there were some accidents early on when people weren't used to buses going down what was an abandoned railway track, there were some accidents, and so the buses essentially stop at every crossing, and so they're kind of slower than they really should be. And then similarly, because they're buses and not trains, it just can't carry as many people as a train can, and so it's overcrowded and it's too slow. It takes about 45 minutes to get across the valley.
Why aren't they trains?
Well, they're not trains because a law was passed about 20 or 30 years ago, which at the time the community was trying to force Metro to build a subway along that right-of-way, but Metro couldn't afford it, and so a law was passed banning above-ground rail, and so what Metro did instead, under the leadership of Xavier Arslowski and Bob Hertzberg, they built this Bus Rapid Transit, which was a great compromise, but now that it's been so successful, VICA is advocating for it to be now converted to light rail.
But what about that law?
Last year, we built a coalition, VICA did, called Valley on Track.
Got it.
ValleyOnTrack.org.
Right.
And we built a coalition of elected officials and community leaders, and we found out that because of the success of the Orange Line, people weren't really opposed to above-ground transit anymore. The law was passed to repeal the bill unanimously, both houses of the legislature, and signed by the governor.
Now what?
Now, what VICA is advocating for is three main projects. One is to find money to convert the Orange Line to rail, to increase speeds and increase capacity.
Do we have a sense how much money that will cost?
Probably about $2 billion.
Is that a lot of money?
Not for rail projects.
Okay.
The other thing that we want to do is Metro is in the final stages of environmental analysis of some kind of rapid transit down Van Nuys Boulevard, which after the Orange Line is the busiest transit line in the San Fernando Valley and the 7th busiest line in all of Los Angeles County.
Okay.
So they're looking at a number of options. VICA says, let's not make the same mistake that we did in the Orange Line, let's make it light rail. So that's another couple of $1 billion. Really, and the thing about that is that while the Orange Line goes through relatively affluent areas in the valley, the Van Nuys line would really serve people who really need transit.
And the third?
The third one is we want to punch a tunnel through the Sepulveda Pass so that you can get on rapid transit from the South Valley into the West Side. And this is something West Side people support as well. And it would eventually connect up with the Purple Line and the Expo Line, and you would get to the airport.
A bus that would go through?
That would be rail as well.
A rail. And how much are they all about $2 billion each?
No, the Sepulveda Pass, because it involves so much tunneling, would be significantly more. And there's lots of different variations. Do you punch a car tunnel through at the same time, which is real, I mean, now you're getting into $20 and $30 billion, or do you make it strictly a rail tunnel, and there you're probably talking $5 to $10 billion.
And the Van Nuys line?
Van Nuys line, to do it the way VICA thinks it ought to be done, about $2.5 billion, which would include a little bit of tunneling in some of the busiest parts of Van Nuys.
So, is there a funding source? Measure R?
Well, as your viewers may recall, Measure R was passed a number of years ago, and it provided some money for the last two projects I mentioned, but not enough to do it really in full. So now what the Metro Board is looking at is another ballot measure to go on the ballot in November of 2016. So not this year, but next year, along with the presidential election. And so they're now in this incredibly complicated, complex process of taking priorities from all the different regional groups and then figuring out what projects will make it onto the project list.
Would it be an extension of Measure R, which was tried a couple of years ago and failed, or would it be something dedicated?
It would be both.
Okay.
It would essentially extend the previous tax measure, and it would also, the truth is they're not sure.
Yet.
Right.
So in the background, we know Governor Brown is looking at rail, but he's looking at high-speed rail.
Right.
And there are some folks, especially on the Republican side of the aisle, that would say we should divert high-speed rail money, just put this on the back burner for projects like what you described.
Correct.
Has VICA looked at that issue?
It has. As long as Governor Brown is in office, there is no way that we're going to divert. Now, as what you're referring to is cap and trade revenue, which has to do with it's a source of revenue having to do with climate change taxes. But essentially, what he has done is he managed to get the legislature to divert some of that to high-speed rail. Look, I think high-speed rail is a good idea, but not all the money is for high-speed rail. There is a fair amount of cap and trade revenue that's left over for other purposes. And right now, the big food fight that's probably going to happen in the Capitol this year is how much of that money ought to go to local projects like the transportation projects we're talking about, the affordable housing people. There's no doubt there's a desperate need for affordable housing in California, especially in Southern California. They want to see some of that money, and look, everybody wants to get their hands on some of that money.
At the same time, as the high-speed rail fight continues, we know there's a big discussion about the Palmdale to Burbank piece of it. That goes right through VICA territory.
It sure does.
And so there are two elements of that. How do we get from Palmdale to Burbank? One would be paralleling the 14 freeway. Another would be through the Angeles National Forest. People on lots of different sides on this issue, not necessarily bedfellows you'd expect.
Right.
Where are we on this, to the extent you're aware?
VICA certainly supports high-speed rail and wants to see it get as quickly as possible from Palmdale to Burbank Airport and then on to Union Station, downtown Los Angeles. We haven't taken a position on the exact route, and I think that what does need to happen is that the High-Speed Rail Authority is studying all the different options pretty thoroughly right now. And so I think we need more information. If they were going to tunnel through the Angeles Forest, what would be the above-ground part? As you know, the route that currently parallels the 14 is where the Metrolink train goes through, and I think what people fear is that while they're okay with Metrolink, that maybe there would be some additional safety problems with high-speed rail. I mean, my sense is that there are things that you could do with that Metrolink track that would both promote safety and speed it up, get it up to high-speed rail so that you don't have to do the tunneling. The tunneling is a good idea, but as you know, the environmentalists are very careful about
less money, saves time.
Saves time, but
less money.
But it is the Angeles National Forest.
Right.
Congressman Schiff has come out against it, and it would have to go through his district. So
it's tunnel.
It is tunneling.
It's a tunnel, so you
would.
But
not all the way. For instance, if you know that area at all, the LA side of the mountains is very steep, and so you could come out probably fairly close to Burbank Airport. But on the other side of the mountains, it's pretty gradual as it goes toward where the 14 actually gets to that ridge where you then enter the Antelope Valley, and that area would probably be a fair amount of above ground.
But in some ways, and I'm just playing it out, couldn't that be quite beautiful? I mean, there is something about, trains on mountains that can be quite majestic. I think about what's happening in Europe or Asia.
Oh, absolutely. If you go to Europe, you can go to the top of mountains on trains. No, look, I agree with you. The idea of train travel being romantic, going through beautiful places, there's a lot that's attractive about that. But some environmentalists don't see it that way. They would see it
as the Sierra Club taken a position?
I believe the Sierra Club is, I don't know.
Fair enough. Where do you go from here on the Valley Track projects?
Well, the main thing from VICA's point of view.
High-speed rail, for that matter, for all of it.
Sure. I mean, high-speed rail is a lot more has to play out in high-speed rail. But what's happening on the Valley Transit projects and this Measure R extension or whatever it's going to be, that is what's really happening right now. And so what we're really focused on is making sure that the Valley's transportation priorities make it onto the Measure R list and make it into the long-range regional planning documents.
Good luck.
Yeah, well, we've got a really good coalition, so we're pretty confident we're going to be successful.
He is Coby King. He is the chair of the Valley Industry and Commerce Association, also known as VICA. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's California Edition.